Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. In today's episode, you're going to hear from Ed Hartin. Ed is one of the world's most influential operational thinkers in the modern fire service when it comes to fire dynamics, incident command, and how we actually make decisions under pressure. He began his career as a firefighter in 1974 and didn't retire until last year, 2025, as fire chief at East County Fire and Rescue. That's more than 50 years in the job and over 30 years operating at chief officer level. Backed up by academic study in the fire service administration and adult education sectors, his Chief Fire Officer designation, and fellowship of the Institute of Fire Engineers, where he also served as president of the USA branch. He's a co-author of 3D Firefighting, a founding member of International Fire Instructors Workshop, an emeritus member of the UL Fire Safety Research Institute Advisory Board. He's a blue card instructor, a member of the Naturalist Decision Making Association, and someone who has delivered training in more than a dozen, probably more, countries across North and South America, Europe, Asia, and Australasia. But what makes Ed's work more relevant to you right now, I think, is what it actually continues to do. For operational firefighters and developing commanders across the world, you're probably already familiar with this because you probably get the emails, or hopefully you do. Because he's got a company called Command Competence, and he provides 10-minute training tactical decision games. They're short, realistic command scenarios that arrive in your inbox every single week and put you into the role of the first arriving officer with limited information, real-time pressure, and high-consequence decisions. They're incredible. They're designed and build is for your command competence, the same way we build any other high-performing skill. Through deliberate practice, it's a rapid and accurate size-ups, recognition of critical cues, understanding what is typical and what is not, selecting plausible goals and actions, risk assessment, coordinating a fire attack, search, ventilation, rescue, clear incident communications. You can complete them on your own, or they're really good to use at station roundtables with your watch, or even at a command level. But the real value is the kind of discussion stuff afterwards, because that's really where we share the mental models and where they're built. That's where crews and officers start to see risk, strategy, and decision-making in the same way, and that is what shows up on the fireground when conditions change. And the thinking behind that is exactly what today's presentation from Ed is about. So this is Ed talking to us about his ongoing research into Fireground Sensemaking and decision-making for the station officer. What is happening in your head while you're still on the way to the job? How your initial frame of reference is formed from a number of cues, how that frame sets your strategy, your risk posture, and the tempo for honestly the entire incident, or so long as you're in charge. Talk about why experience on its own is not enough, why expertise is the ability to recognize patterns in context and adapt when the situation does not make that what you expected to find. It's about the gap between declarative knowledge and tacit knowledge. That I had to think about that so many times when Ed said it, and then look at it and think about it, look about it. And I've been looking at the presentation since I came back. It's the difference between knowing the theory and being able to apply it in the heat, the noise, the time pressures in the moment. And while most of our training still focuses on the mechanics of command rather than the cognitive process that sits underneath it. Now, again, to give you some context around where this was recorded, so I recently came back from Australia. I was fortunate enough to be invited to the International Fire Instructors Workshop 2026. Traditionally, these are invitation only, kind of closed doors, small groups, conversations, not always particular big audiences or anything like that. It's not performative. And for nearly 2 decades, these workshops have brought together experienced fire instructors from around the world to challenge each other and refine the craft of training firefighters. Live fire practice, live fire methodology, host stream applications, instructor development, and the uncomfortable gaps that sit between doctrine and real-world practice. We're bringing these episodes to you with the full consent and support of the organizers and the attendees, because we wanted to break the model and slightly just tweak it, bringing it to you, the rest of the world, so you can come inside the room with us. So what you're hearing once again is live, or obviously was live. There is some real background noise in there. We've tried to filter it out. It's a real working environment. But this one is a presentation, and the theme this year was back to basics. Alongside all of these episodes is a real focus, deliberately, on longevity in the job. Because if we're going to push competence through realistic fire behavior training, which is what some of this evolved around, we have to be as disciplined about reducing the invisible risks that come with that exposure. That's why I made a deliberate decision to partner with Enduro Protect for these episodes. They've developed particulate blocking protection after 5 years of research, trialing, and rigorous testing. We're talking flash hoods, base layers, liner gloves, and socks designed to provide complete head-to-toe protection from harmful carcinogens. They're now being used by fire and rescue services, police, ambulance, Ministry of Defence, all over the world, and by me. I've been wearing the garments for the last 12 to 18 months in live fire training environments across the UK and internationally, and the biggest reassurance for me is simple. After the burn, you don't get that post-fire smell on your skin. You're not getting that residue transferring through onto your body, and despite repeated washes and hard use, they continue to perform exactly as they were the first day I got them. And protection only really works if it's consistent. We're also partnering with D-Wipe because they're equally focused on contamination control. Their study with Manchester Metropolitan University demonstrated that their wipes remove harmful dioxins and PAHs from the skin. I carry their multi-packs in my kit bag on the truck every single day, individually packed, massive sizes, always there when you need them. It's simple, practical, and has become routine doctrine for me. These two products work really well together. If you're serious about developing your fire behavior training and your operational competence, you should not have to accept long-term health consequences as a price of that progression. You'll find links for both of those companies in the episode notes below. And I really encourage you to go over and take your own long-term health seriously. You'll also find a link to download Ed Hartin's full presentation that goes along with this audio, so you can study the models, share it with your friends, stick it in the WhatsApp groups, print it off, talk about it around the watch table, because this research and the learning points really need to be thought about in depth and use them with your own crews and your own command teams. This is about bringing world-class instructor-level learning into the hands of you. So without further ado, this is Ed Hartin's presentation at the International Fire Instructors Workshop 2026. I'll see you on the other side.
I've been doing this for a long time, and I've had some misadventures along the way that kind of ignited my passion for fire dynamics. I was blown out of a building by a backdraft in the late 1970s, and that kind of piqued my interest. I said, nobody recognized that this was going to happen. Why is that the case? And people could choose the right answer in a multiple choice test about backdraft indicators, but they couldn't recognize them. And this is some experienced people and some less experienced people. Over that time, I've developed a passion for fire dynamics, and then probably in the late 1980s, had an encounter with some folks that work for a guy named Gary Klein. Some of you might be familiar with his work in recognition, prime decision making, which we'll get back to. And I was kind of curious about how it is that people make decisions on the fireground. And I started out by just looking at myself, talking with the colleagues, saying, how do we think we do this? And we came up with some rather rough theories, which it turned out Gary Klein also found the same thing, looking at other fire officers, and refined that into something that was a little bit more usable. So my focus now, I've been retired since February 28th of last year, so I'm coming up on a year of allegedly being retired. My wife would say no. And my focus now is on fire dynamics, strategy and tactics, and command. And I've been doing a research project similar to my friend Carol, except that mine is a qualitative research project and his is quantitative. We don't see those as competing worldviews, just that they're complementary. I've written a lot of stuff, co-author of 3D Firefighting. I've written over 600 tactical decision games for fire officers. We'll talk about where you can gain access to those when we get to the end. And due to my connection with John and Paul Grimwood and Shan and some of the others in the international community, I've had the opportunity to travel to about a dozen countries and learn things from the people that I encountered and share my knowledge with them. As far as professional service, I'm a past president of the USA branch of the IFE. So thanks to the IFE Australia branch for hosting this workshop. So as an overview, one of the things that remains a question for me, I know a little bit more about this now than I did before, is how is it the station officers make sense of structure fires during response and arrival at these kind of incidents? One of the things that drove my interest in this is I assisted a department that I used to work for with a serious injury investigation, and there were significant differences in what people thought they were going to find when they arrived at this incident. Some of them made some decisions, which in retrospect were not good decisions. They made perfect sense to them at the time, but they were not good decisions. And one individual was seriously burned over 45% of his body, spent months in the intensive care unit. As I worked through that process, I said, I need to understand more about how that front end piece works. And that's what this presentation is about. That's what my ongoing research is about. As with Carol's most recent element, this is a work in progress. In fact, I just got notice in my phone while Carol was speaking that there's another individual to be interviewed in my in my project. So, but we'll kind of dig into that a little bit. How might this pre-arrival anticipation and planning impact on that decision process? That's another element. Well, what is people's frame of reference as they're arriving at this incident, and what leverage points might improve station officers' decision-making effectiveness? Because again, at the end of the day, understanding it is great, but being able to take that understanding and apply that to make a positive difference is even more important. So we're going to give you a puzzle, and so the challenge is you've got this puzzle, and you've been handed a box, and you've been told that this puzzle is a jigsaw puzzle of a house fire. And you don't have the cover of the box, so you don't have a picture of this. You don't know what it looks like in advance. You have to kind of figure it out by putting the puzzle together. So what are the first things that come to mind when you get dispatched to a fire in a house? Anybody want to share? If you don't, I'll...
Social demographics, building restrictions.
Yeah. Building instruction in that neighborhood. What are the social demographics? What's that area of the community? Have I been there before? Have I been to that house before? Have I been to that neighborhood before? And we start to build a picture in our mind. Well, there's a challenge with this. I don't know actually, I do know firefighters in Australia are very much like firefighters in the United States. You have multiple shifts, and sometimes there's a little bit of inter-shift rivalry that goes on. So in this case, you've been given this puzzle to solve, but one of the other shifts has stolen some pieces out of the box. And the other shift said, we'll go that one better, and they've taken some random pieces from some other puzzle, and they've put those in the box. So you have some missing information, you have some irrelevant information, and I'm a dog guy, so maybe the dog chewed up some of the pieces, so you've got some ambiguous information on, does this fit or not? So that's kind of the analogy that we're going to use as we walk through this for the day. And then what decisions will you need to make? I mean, I started looking at some task level activity in a conversation with somebody the other day, and we figured out there was like 6 or 8 things that some decisions that they have to make if they're establishing a water supply from a hydrant as a firefighter. There's a bunch of decisions particularly if the hydrant doesn't work. For that first arriving station officer, they've got a whole passel of decisions they make. Some things they're going to decide before they get there. Am I going to call for some additional help before I arrive based on the data that I've received to this point? What route are we going to take? Or is the motor driver taking the correct route? Whole bunch of decisions that we need to make. So some critical questions. How do station officers make sense of an incident before they ever step off the pump? Or do they? Now, I've talked to some fire officers that have said, I don't even want to think about what I'm going to find before I get there because it might bias me and I might be making assumptions that are incorrect. Now, there's research that says if you hold your hypothesis about what you think you're going to find loosely, You're going to queue up information that might be useful to you while you're responding to that call. As long as you don't hold on to it too tight when you get there. So if you have something that violates your expectation, you can pivot. What cues do we notice and what do we miss? Well, one of the things that I've found out is that our frame of reference influences what we look for. If I think I'm going to a fire in a dense urban environment where I'm going to encounter high occupant load in apartments, that's going to frame the things that I think that I'm going to need to do. If I'm going to a fire in a rural area that doesn't have any fire hydrants, I'm going to be thinking about other kinds of things. If I'm going to an area that's an industrial area that's got big buildings, I know that James is going to talk about a fire in a Home Depot later today. I interviewed him after this incident. Said, James, when did you decide that things were not as they should be? And he made one visual observation, and he said, "Oh no, this is not right." So again, I think that frame of reference is really pretty important, and how our early assumptions shape our initial strategy and our risk tolerance. What's the difference between going to a fire where you're told that everybody's out of the building and one where you've got persons reported? Is there a difference? Should there be a difference? Well, there is a difference. I mean, that's a human thing. But should there be? Again, something to think about. When and how do we recognize that our initial understanding is wrong? And that holds true in that response phase. I'm on my way to the call. I have some information. And then all of a sudden now dispatch tells me, no, it's not a fire in a car. It's a fire that's extended the house. Or I arrive and I observe some conditions that are inconsistent with what I thought I was going to find. How do I recognize that? So kind of an important thing.
We're working in collaboration with the Blue Light Show, a national conference and exhibition built around one thing: blue light services do better together than apart. I'm going to be there 1st and 2nd of July 2026 at the event, getting involved with those conversations and connecting with people who really care about doing the job better across the blue light sector. I'll see you there.
So we'll dig a little bit into experience and expertise. And John alluded to this earlier about, why should I believe what this person says? And just because they've been in the job for a long time, or just because they have gray hair, or they're a chief officer, or those are not good. Those are not good reasons. So we have to disentangle this whole experience and expertise thing. So a question that I started to think about when I looked at this is, so how many fires have we been to? And maybe you work in a very busy firehouse that has a lot of fire duty. Maybe you work in a very quiet station that doesn't have a lot of fire duty. Your experience is going to be different. And then you have to disentangle, well, what kind of experience? Your experience as a firefighter in the back of the pump is different than your experience as a station officer. Your experience as a motor driver is different than your experience as a station officer. Your experience as the first arriving station officer is different than if you got there fourth. You came on a second alarm and now there's things going on. You're making different kinds of decisions so that there's different sorts of experience. What was your role? Really important. What did you learn? Did you just go and say, yeah, well, the fire went out, nobody get hurt, and we go back to quarters and have a coffee and that's it? Or we have a conversation about what happened and the things that went well, the things that didn't go well, maybe the areas that we could improve. Was there anything that you saw that puzzled you? Did you dig into that to try and figure out, well, why did that happen? How much do you remember? Now, that's a challenge. That's a challenge for me because, like John said, I've been doing this for a long time. There's a couple of fires. There's probably half a dozen fires from back in the early 1970s that I remember in explicit detail. Usually they involve something bad. There's others that are a fuzzy memory. I don't remember all of the details, but they're kind of a blend of things that form the basis of some of my knowledge that I can't necessarily put out there very easily. I have to really work at that. Can you apply it in context? Can I take that knowledge? Let's say I've been to I newly promoted station officer. When I get promoted to captain, which is the equivalent to your station officers, I went to a bunch of fires in houses before I ever went to a commercial fire. So the question is, can I apply what I learned in the house fires in a different context and not stuff it up? How much experience do you really have? I mean, so it's something we have to look inside and think about that. And then later we'll talk about, and what can I do about it? Expertise is a bit different. That is superior performance in a specified set of representative tasks for a domain. So if you're a station officer, one of the tasks that you might need to do in the domain of firefighting is that you need to be able to assess the situation and put your crew to work and put another crew or a couple more crews to work at a fire in a building. That might be one of the things that you might need to do. So do you have expertise as a fireground commander? And again, I think back to when I first got promoted to captain, and I thought that I was really pretty good. I really wasn't. I was better than average, but I wasn't as good as I thought I was, and I had to really work at that. Fortunately, I did it for a long time. So there's different kinds of knowledge, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. The people that were involved in the incident where I got blown out of the building in a backdraft, they had declarative knowledge. They could tell you what are the signs of a backdraft if you asked them on a written test. They had procedural knowledge. They knew how to do things. But what was missing was this tacit knowledge, this web of intuitive and experiential knowledge that allowed them to apply that in context. They were lacking in that particular domain. So if we kind of look at an example of that, I mean, recognizing a pattern of changing conditions and anticipating potential for flashover is an application of tacit knowledge. If you're in that building and all of a sudden you start to see flames in the smoke layer and the interface between the clear air below and the smoke above is beginning to drop down and the temperature's beginning to go up, you're probably not going to do a process of analysis to figure out that flashover is imminent. If you do, you're going to have a different experience than if you recognize that with your tacit knowledge and you take action to stop that from happening, or you move yourself to a different location. So there's a difference between routine and adaptive expertise. And one of the things that I think about when I consider this, I'm a blue card incident command instructor. I know some of you may have some familiarity with that program. And in that program, one of the simulations that's used in the certification lab is a little small L-shaped commercial building. It's a very simple fire. It's a very simple building, and everybody that goes through that training and certification process is very, very familiar with it. So, for example, I'll pick on Paul Cricks because I know he's a blue card certified IC. If I was to have him come up right now and perform as the initial incident commander or the chief officer arriving after the first couple of companies went to work, he would do an outstanding job with that simulation. That's an example of routine expertise because everybody that has done blue card has done that simulation many, many, many times, and there's utility to that. It's valuable, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if I then took Paul and I gave him a very complex commercial building someplace in downtown Sydney, that he would do as well. He probably would do pretty good because he's a solid IC, but he might have a few struggles with that because it's quite a bit different. So how do we develop that? Well, one of the things is through personal experience. There was a guy that worked for the U.S. Forest Service back in the 1940s, and he was talking about decision making in a wildland context and experience judgment. And he said, if you've gone to fires in all types of fuel, in all types of terrain, under all types of weather conditions, you remembered everything that happened exactly as it did, your experience judgment is probably pretty good. And the same thing holds true in the structural environment, but nobody's done that. So we have this limited experience base that we have to draw on. Some have more than others, but all of us have limits. Another way is through directed experience. Now, there are some places that when you're going to become a station officer, part of your training is you get to be the station officer, but you're on a pump that has a real station officer. So you get to be, in essence, the officer of the day. You get to be an apprentice station officer. I didn't get that. I took a test. They handed me a captain's badge and said, "Don't screw up." So there was no apprenticeship, not in the formal sense. Now, I did have some mentors that I studied under, but I had to go find them. It wasn't the organization didn't help me with that. I just had an interest, and I would go spend time with these guys and ask them questions. Well, that's directed experience. And there's manufactured experience, which is using simulation. And that can be good or that can be less good. It depends on what I'm trying to accomplish and the appropriate elements of fidelity in that simulation, cognitive fidelity in particular, which is does the simulation cause me to have to make the same kinds of decisions as I would make in actuality? And then vicarious experience. This in a way, this is kind of kitchen table experience, where you went to a fire and we sit down at the kitchen table, or if it's not in the firehouse, there's probably a beer involved. And we sit down and we talk about that. And you tell me about that fire and I ask you questions and I think about that. And at times over the course of my career, when I've encountered situations, there were images that came to mind that somebody had shared with me. Somebody said, "Hey, I encountered this and this was a problem and this is what I did." And when I've looked at what's being presented to me, I said, I've heard this before. And that's been pretty useful. So sense making is an interesting thing. Probably in psychology, it's one of the in a way it's one of the simplest concepts because it is exactly what it says that it is. It's sense making is making sense out of things, and that's attributed to Carl Weick, who was a really important researcher in the area of sense making. So the way that the way people take their experience and they make sense out of it, they interpret that, they assign meaning to that, and it's an effort to answer questions about what's going on and what is it that I should do. So I think that makes sense making pretty important to what it is that we do as firefighters and fire officers. We're always trying to answer those questions. People call us, they have an emergency, we turn up, and we have to figure out what's going on, and we have to figure out what it is that we're going to do about it. And to some extent, I agree with Carol that we can't just say, "No, well, too bad for you, we're not going to do anything." And we generally don't do that. Now, there are ranges of things that we can do. We have to manage the risks that's presented. And so
I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
We operate in an environment that has limited, ambiguous, and dynamic information. That is, as John has said on more than one occasion, it makes this the most difficult job in the world to do well. So there's going to be a couple of slides that present some psychological theories. I'm going to try and there's no math. Carol will be sad. There's no math, but there is a little bit of complexity. So I'm going to try and boil that down and make things a little bit simpler. So this is a theory that was developed by Gary Klein and some of his colleagues, which attempts to explain how it is that we make sense of things that we encounter in the world. And part of this has a common sense element to it, which is we have a frame of reference that manages our attention, defines what counts as data, and filters that data. Because if we think about this, we are inundated with information all the time. We can't pay attention to all of it. So we have to decide, what am I going to pay attention to? And this is particularly true when we add the time pressure element of responding to an emergency. So data are the elements that we use to choose or to construct a frame. Now, the thing is neither one of these things comes first. They go back and forth to one another. So we get some data. Initially, when we're dispatched on a call, Australia's like the United States. You get an address and you get an incident type. You're going to a residential fire at 456 Main Street. Okay. So I think about, okay, well, what does Main Street look like? What kind of buildings are there? I start to begin to build that picture in my mind. As I get additional information, then I say, is this consistent? Does this fit into my frame of reference? If it doesn't, I need to change my frame of reference. Now, I may hold onto it really tight, and I may not integrate that new information. That's a problem. Or I may have to make that shift. So this is kind of a useful way to look at this. Now, we have multiple frames, depending on what kind of incidents that we've responded to. We might have house fire frames, we might have apartment building frames, we might have commercial frames, we might have strip mall frames, we might have big box frames. I know James has got a Home Depot frame. And within that, there may be sort of subframes. So I've been to house fires in very, very small houses, and I've been to house fires in very, 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 very large houses. And they are not the same. They are not the same. I've been to house fires in areas that have water supply. Been to house fires in areas that don't. So there's, again, multiple frames. And the greater our breadth of experience, probably the more frames that we have to choose from, and the easier it's going to be for us to adapt and modify those frames to build a new frame of reference for the incident that I'm responding to. So when we think about this concept of anticipation and planning, I'm a planner. I really, really do not like surprises. I don't even like good surprises. I don't even like surprises on my birthday. When the guys that I worked with in my last job, they were going to have a retirement party for me, and they told my wife that she needed to get me to this pub without telling me why. She's like, I can't do that. He won't. I mean, he likes beer, but I can't do that. He really won't like that. So. Again, I try and think ahead. My wife says that I'm a pessimist. I say, no, I'm a realist. I anticipate that things are going to get stuffed up, and I try and be prepared to deal with those things. So part of this anticipation and planning that the station officer engages with is they're mentally asking themselves, is this typical? Now, this is not necessarily a conscious process, but this is what's going on inside people's heads. If they've got experience in this domain, as I'm going, it's like, is this typical? Is there something that doesn't fit here? What do I expect to find? What cues are relevant? Now, again, I'm not asking myself these questions, but these questions are what's driving the mental processes that are going on in my head. Because again, we get a lot of other information. There's lots of stuff going on around us, and it may not all be relevant. What goals are plausible? So one of these is as I'm going on this and I'm thinking about what is this, can I fight this fire offensively? Can I put this fire out or not? Again, based on the information that I'm receiving. Because if I think that this is an offensive job, the list of things I'm going to have to decide and the potential actions I'm going to have to take are very, very, very different than if I'm getting indicators that this is a fire that is beyond the capability to deal with offensive, and I'm going to deal with it defensively. If I'm getting reports that there's multiple buildings involved, and I'm observing that, oh, gee, there's about a very high wind speed today, and the temperature is very, okay. This is a totally different thing. This is not a room of contents fire in a single family home. So what actions may I need to take? And there's more on this in a little bit. So we're going to delve a little bit into something called naturalistic decision-making. And naturalistic decision-making is about how people make decisions in the real world, particularly if they've got ambiguous conditions, if they've got time pressure, if they have high-stakes environments. You know, when I read this definition, I said, "Oh yeah, this is exactly what we do every day." I mean, this is a key element in our work. Early naturalistic decision-making work focused on fireground decision-making. So when Gary Klein got a contract to study decision-making for the Army, he was looking for what is the closest thing to combat that I can find in a civilian environment, because there weren't any wars going on when he was doing this, and he couldn't study military leaders, so he had to find somebody else. And he said, well, study fire officers, because they have a very similar kind of working environment. So there's a couple of research projects that were done. The first, actually, the order shown by the dates is actually goofy, but the last one was done first, and the first one's done last. First studied rapid decision-making on the fireground, and they looked at a bunch of fire officers and found some very interesting things and developed this theory of how it is that experienced fire officers actually make decisions. Now, they started this research off with the idea that a decision was comparing two or more options and then making a choice. But they thought it involved comparing options, looking at advantages and disadvantages and things like that, sort of a rationalistic decision-making model. And what they found out was that was what was going on, is people were choosing without making a comparison. That they experienced practitioners would look at a situation and they would say, I think this will work. And they didn't compare it to a bunch of other things. There were other options that they could have chosen. It's kind of like as we were talking about yesterday, the hose reel, the 38, the 70. There's at least three choices as to what we can do to apply water to a fire. But frequently there's a decision is made without weighing, should I do this or should it? No, it appears obvious to that person at the time. This picture is kind of relevant to that. When I worked on Whidbey Island up in Washington State, this is an experiment that was done by UL on apartment fires. And I showed this picture to the people that work for me, and I said, how many gallons a minute, I could translate that to liters a minute, do you think it's going to take to knock this fire down and achieve fire control, and how many gallons of water do you think it will take to accomplish that task? The range was tremendous. And there were two people that gave me what was actually the correct answer to this, and that might have been high, but a correct answer to this. And two people gave me about 600 liters a minute. So I asked the first one, who was a brand new firefighter, just gotten out of the academy. I said, well, why do you think that will work? And he says, well, that's what we always used in the academy. Why wouldn't it work? Right answer, wrong reason. I asked the other person, she had been on the job for about 7 years, and she said, well, I think these apartment units are pretty small. I think the fire is mostly on the outside of the building. And as soon as I put 150 gallons a minute or 600 liters a minute on this, the fire is going to go out. Similar sort of thing with the total volume of water. This fire was knocked down. Fire control was achieved with less than 300 gallons of water. The thing is that they made those decisions for very different reasons. One had a basis in some experience, and the other one did not. It was just a default choice. I just do what I do. There were other options. I didn't think of them, but not because that made the most sense, but just simply because it was a default option. So there's a difference between novices and experts in that sort of process. So this is a sort of decision-making model that's used within the Blue Card Incident Command Training Program that looks at critical fireground factors, rules of engagement, leading to strategy, an incident action plan, and then implementing that plan to address tactical priorities using standard operating guidelines and tactical orders. Now, what this model does is this model provides us with declarative and process knowledge, but it doesn't necessarily give us the tacit knowledge that says, so which of these critical factors are important in this particular case? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And we'll talk a little bit about risk as to how this applies. So when we look at critical factors, we've got fixed factors and variable factors. Fixed factors are there today. So I stayed at the Merrickville station for a couple of days before coming over here. And as I walked around the neighborhood, I was looking at all sorts of fixed factors. I think John mentioned yesterday that you can't go any place with me without me visualizing things being on fire, and that tends to weird people out. But as I walked around the neighborhood, I was looking at the buildings and I was imagining, the guys from Merrickville turning up at these places with them being on fire and so forth. And I had less trouble with the water supply than I did previously, because when first time I came here, I didn't know that the hydrants were under the ground. But nonetheless, fixed factors there all the time. Variable factors change from minute to minute, both before, during, and after the incident. Now, there's a lot of fixed and variable factors. Many of them that could be critical in a given incident. But you can't think about all of them. I mean, if I look at the online training program in Blue Card, there's 87 potential critical factors. I don't think that's even close. Not even close to the number that there might be out in the real world. That's just examples. You can't think about that many things in your head. So you're going to pick 2, 3, 4 things that are critical anchors that are going to tell you what it is that you think that you're coming into. And then you're going to begin to elaborate on that, or you're going to modify that as you go along. Okay, this looks like a very busy, complicated graphic that describes something. This book is really good. If you're interested in this topic, I would highly recommend it. Sources of Power by Gary Klein. One of the things about this is learning about this model will not make you a better incident commander. But it does help explain why some people are good at this and why some people maybe struggle a little bit. And if you're looking for levers to identify how do we get better, there's a couple of clues in here. So there's several paths that we can take through this model. One of them is very simple. It's straight up recognition. I have seen this before.
It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefights podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behavior, firefighter health, cancer risks, incident debriefs, and so much more. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes.
So you go to, let's say you work in a response area that has a lot of small one-story houses, and you have a lot of room and contents fires in those small one-story houses. Or maybe you live in an area that has unit blocks and you go to a lot of unit block fires. There's some certain characteristics in the way that they present. So when you turn up and you look at this thing and you say, I have seen this before, that's a room and contents fire. You know what kind of things you can accomplish. You know what sorts of things you need to do. You recognize critical cues that are related to that. So that's a straight up recognitional process. That's the simplest way through this. Just go straight down. You experience a situation. You recognize it as typical. You expect certain things. You know what you can accomplish. You recognize what cues are important in that particular circumstance, and you come up with a list of actions and you do it. And that's pretty common. There's another way that you can go through this, which is you run through that process and you come up with an option, and then you have a question in your mind. Maybe it's that situation where it's that single family home, that small 1-story house, but yet now the fire is a bit more advanced. And now I'm thinking about taking a particular course of action. I have a question in my mind. Is this going to work? I kind of mentally simulate that, and I might say, yeah, I think this is going to work, and I keep doing it. Or I might say, no, I think I'm going to back this up. I'm going to add another hose line, or I'm going to do this thing a little bit differently because I have some concerns about what's going on. And that's what goes on down here, where I ask myself, will it work? Yes, but I modify the action, and then I go do it. And if the answer is no, then I'm back to square one. I've got to come up with a different plan. Up on this upper left quadrant here, we have a process of diagnosis. So now maybe I arrive and I'm seeing something that does not fit. I expected I was going to see this, and I see something else. What's up with that? Now, one example that comes to mind is that you received a report from dispatch while you were responding to this call that the callers reported there was a lot of smoke coming from the building. And you arrive, and there's not a lot of smoke coming from the building. There could be a couple of answers to that. One is it could be that the citizens have a different definition of a lot of smoke than you do. The other possibility is that the fire was pushing a bunch of smoke from the building, but it's now gone vent limited, and now there's nothing showing. Which is why one of the UL's tactical considerations is nothing showing means nothing, because it could have been, and now it's not, because the fire's gone vent limited and the amount of smoke being discharged is different. So this is a tool that we can use to kind of look at decisions and say, how did I do this? Did I see an anomaly, and did I have to modify that? Did I mentally simulate my course of action to identify whether or not it was going to work? Now, there's some challenges to incident command, and one of those is that you, me, we probably don't know as much as we think we do. It's called the illusion of explanatory depth. And one of the things that I've discovered over the course of my career is that it has a big impact on our sense making and decision making. If I think I know what's going on, but I really don't, it's not the things that I don't know that cause me a problem. It's the things that I think that I know that are wrong. What can we do about it? We can't implement effective tactics if we don't understand the fire environment and the effectiveness of our operations. When I went to Sweden early in the 2000s, it was like getting slapped in the forehead, because I realized that I really didn't know much about fire dynamics. It changed my life. John's been through a similar life-changing experience, as have many people in this room. So if we think about what incident commanders require, and this is incident commanders at any level, whether it be a station officer, an inspector, whoever might be running an incident, is we need to have an effective mindset, attitude, and aptitude. Have to have well-developed job knowledge and experience, have to have effective incident management skills, and we have to have leadership rooted in credibility and competence. And that's credibility and competence with the people that we're asking to do the work. So how do we develop expertise? Well, one of the things is we need to engage in practice. Not just any kind of practice, but we've got to engage in deliberate practice. You have to do it on purpose. It's kind of like learning a sport, whether you're trying to get better in martial arts, or whether you play football, that'd be the round kind of football, or any other athletic activity. You concentrate, you apply different strategies to improve performance on an incremental basis to get a little bit better every day. We have to seek feedback. And we were talking about the term feedback earlier today, and some people think that feedback is was it we were talking? No, I think it might have been on your podcast talking about feedback, and that feedback is sometimes perceived as a negative thing, as criticism, which is no. It's let's tell me how I can get better. analysis, studying your own past performance, your experience and the performance of experts. You know, as I've been interviewing incident commanders in my research project, I've asked a lot of them, how did you learn to be an incident commander? And I have one agency that has no formal command training program, and those guys all say, I learned by watching other people. And I've always believed that. Some people are exemplary and we want to be like them, and other people, their purpose in life is to serve as a bad example. So we want to look at that. And then we want to modify it. We want to modify and adjust how it is that we go about the work based on what it is that we figured out. And then we need to loop this process around. Now, one of the things, and this is not a sales pitch, because I don't sell tactical decision games. I write them, I give them away for free. There's one a week for station officers and one a month for senior officers. Not because senior officers need less; they need just as much, maybe more. But I only have a limited amount of time. So one of the things that we can do is we can engage in practice as incident commanders. And tactical decision games provide us with a practice space for that. I got the idea for this from Major John Schmidt, who's a retired Marine Corps major. That QR code is a link to his, it's sort of a book. It's in a PDF form. It's called Tactical Decision Games Workbook. And that explains a lot of the underlying why does this work. And it's from a military context, but it's actually a pretty good resource. One other thing, if you missed something and you want a copy of the presentation, there's a QR code that you can download it at the end, and then I'll also put it's up on my website now, but I put a link so you can find it if you didn't get the QR code. So we think about that pre-arrival thinking process, and why is it that I would want to study this? So we've got this timeline. Fire ignites. At some point in time, it's discovered and somebody calls in the emergency. The dispatcher sends firefighters on the call. They go en route, and then they get there and they do work. Oh, and those droplets are not to scale. They're actually 0.3 millimeters, 7 bars at the nozzle. So the first arriving station officer establishes that initial frame of reference. They're figuring it out when they're on the way there. When they get there, they're going to take command of this thing, and they're going to communicate what it is that they're going on. They're going to make assignments to other people. So they define the strategy and the risk posture of this incident, and that sort of drives the tempo of what it is that's going on, whether this is a very fast-paced incident, whether this is an incident that presents unusual hazards, maybe defensive fire conditions, and things slow down a little bit. Yet most of our training focuses on the mechanics of command and strategy and tactics. It doesn't focus on cognition. It doesn't focus on that mental process that we use in order to make these decisions. So I was kind of curious about this. So as I mentioned, I'm doing a research project. The participants are station officers who were the initial incident commander at a working structure fire. All of them are from the Portland, Oregon, Vancouver, Washington metropolitan area. It's a fairly small urban area. I mean, probably maybe 700,000 people between the two cities. And I'm using cognitive interviews, which are a semi-structured interview, focusing on pre-arrival and early command of incident operations. And the focus is on their anticipation. You know, what did they think they were going to find? What cues did they pay attention to? How did they frame the incident? What sort of frame handling did they do? Did they change their mind? And for example, the first interview I did was a station officer that get dispatched to a car fire, and then 30 seconds out, he get told that it was extended to the house. So now he had to shift gears from a really simple car fire operation, which he and his two firefighters could deal with very easily, to now a house fire where he didn't know if he had any occupants in the house, and he was going to be operating at this incident for a while by himself because the other companies didn't get dispatched until 30 seconds before he arrived. And then that early incident action plan, and how is that influenced by those other factors? So as I mentioned, I haven't completed the full amount of this research project, but what I have found is that the station officers are choosing a frame of reference based on a limited number of cues. There's a couple of things that jump out, and they say, this is what I think I'm going to find. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, but there's a couple of things that will jump out, and that is not consistent across all incidents as to what those cues are. They are dependent upon the particular kind of event. Sometimes that initial frame doesn't match later information about what's found. Some of the station officers are better at modifying or changing frames than others. The initial frame can help identify anomalies. This is not what I thought I was going to find, but sometimes not so much. So I'm really kind of curious to see how this is going to float out. So we'll kind of jump ahead a little bit in a way and think about what is size up. Can anybody give me a definition of what size up? Do you guys use that term, size up?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is that? Okay, so in a sense, size up is sense making. It's trying to figure out what's going on and what is it that I need to do about that. And that involves these critical factors that we talked about before. Now, you could divide them out in a different way. You could put different names on them, but again, we're thinking about things that were there before the fact, and those things I can find out before I go. I can find out a week before. I can find out a month before. People would always ask me, why do you come, when you respond to an incident, why do you always come back a different way than the way that you went? I said, two reasons. One is it confuses the terrorists. And the other one is I get to see different things. When I go home for lunch, I go a different way every time. I'm trying to be all over the place, looking around, seeing what it is that's going on. I even do that when I'm out visiting other places. So 3 questions. What's the problem? What's getting in the way of me achieving? What are my tactical objectives, and what's getting in the way of achieving them? And what can hurt or kill me right now? 3 important questions as a part of that size up process. So one of the things that's significant in our work is about dealing with risk. So a hazard is anything that could cause harm, and risk is a combination of probability and severity of harm from a hazard. And we have a simple way that we look at this. We operate in a controlled and calculated manner. We'll accept more risk to save savable lives, less risk to save savable properties, and if there's nothing to be saved, we don't want to accept much risk at all. Now, one of the things is that fireground risk is not a mathematical probability. It's not like rolling dice. You can do the math on rolling dice and figure out, okay, what's likely to happen. Well, in the fireground, we have a lot of ambiguity. We have a lot of variables that we don't necessarily know exactly what the deal is. How long has this fire been burning? How long is this building going to stay intact before it falls on our head? So this becomes a little bit more of a challenge. So is there a safety problem? Well, these are some questions that we use to kind of try and frame that. Is it reasonable to believe that the building is occupied? This is this whole, if they tell you everybody's out, do you believe them? If they tell you there's people in there, do you believe them? And why? Now, in a lot of cases, we do things with that information, but we don't necessarily consciously think about why do we do what we do? Can I recognize searchable space? Can I do something about it? Well, one of the things I do is put the fire out. Can I do that? So this is all about managing real work and doing it over and over again. This is my friend, Deputy Chief Chris Stewart. He retired from the Phoenix Fire Department. And, as we look at this, we need to get better at what it is that we do every single day. So I probably have like 4 seconds for questions. about that. So here's my contact information. Left side is a QR code to download the presentation. Right side is a QR code to visit the website. If you hang out on the website for more than 15 seconds, you're going to be asked if you want to sign up to receive an email every week with links to tactical decision games. If you're interested in that, or if you'd like to talk about that, you can reach me either at that phone number on cell or WhatsApp. Website's there, email's there. So thanks for listening. If you have questions, see me at morning tea.
Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations. We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.